to the seated position. It's also fine to stand if that's preferable. And holding your body upright so that you are alert and engaged for the practice, with a spine that is straight but not stiff, so that the body actually can soften around the spine that's holding you upright. So, taking a moment to allow the eyes to close if that feels okay. It's also fine to keep them open and gaze downward a bit, surrendering your weight into the support of the surface that you're either sitting or standing on, releasing into the support of the earth, making any micro movements in the body so that you feel comfortable, engaged, upright, and easeful to the degree that you can. With a wide angle lens of attention over the whole body, just simply noticing how things are. Perhaps aware of the points of contact with the back of the body and the surface or the soles of the feet. If you're standing, aware of the various other sensations in the body from your activity so far. So that might be tingling or pulsing, vibration. You may notice temperature. It's bringing full awareness to the whole body. Receptive to the various sensations that you're noticing. And for a moment, let's now open up to include sound. So sound perhaps in the room that you're in or maybe outside of the room. And again, a receptive attitude in the mind. It's receiving the experience of sound. And gradually beginning to bring the attention back inward to the body. And let's begin by taking a deep inhalation through the nose and exhale through the mouth, perhaps allowing the exhalation to be just a little bit longer. And let's go ahead and do one more breath. Inhalation through the nose and exhalation. And now beginning with a bit of a more narrow focus of attention on the sensations that you notice when you breathe. So allowing the inhalation and the exhalation to occur all on their own. The body knows how to breathe, and there's no need to make the breath different or special. And as you inhale and exhale, see if you can notice where the sensation is most prominent. Maybe the belly or the chest, the nostrils, where you feel it in a broader way. You feel sensations more broadly as you inhale and as you exhale. Tracking the sensations on the inhale and the exhale. Each time you find yourself in thought, not a problem at all. Simply note thinking, gently release the thought, soften the body, and return awareness to tracking the sensations as you breathe. Notice where the mind is, gently releasing thought, softening the body, and returning to breath sensation. Noticing where the mind is. Again, noticing where the mind is, releasing thought. You might label thinking, releasing it, softening the body, and then returning to the breath, tracking the in breath and the out breath at the level of sensation. And as you feel ready, if your eyes were closed, and gently allow the eyes to open. And if they were open, re engaging with your surroundings. Thank you for practicing today. everyone, and welcome to the Science Corner. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Judson Brewer. We are delighted to have him as our guest today, and I'm going to turn it over to Judd to say a little bit about his background.
Thanks, Tara, and thanks for having me. I'm the Director of Research and Innovation at Brown University's Mindfulness Center. I'm also an associate professor in the departments of Behavioral and Social Sciences, as well as psychiatry in the medical school at Brown.
All right. Well, thanks so much. And thank you again for agreeing to do this. So, Judd, my first question is that, a lot of your research has been covered by the media of late. And what do you think the media tends to get wrong in talking about mindfulness practice and research? Is there something that, the public should be aware of, to be kind of on the watch for? What do they get wrong and what do they get right?
Well, I would say they get a lot right. And there are, the more inquisitive and curious the reporters are, I find, the more they're actually able to get some of the nuances. But I think they really face a tough a tough obstacle where they've got to get some really nuanced and specific things down in a way that the readers can understand them, and also in a way that they can keep people's attention. So they've got a tough haul to start with. I would say the two things that I've seen most commonly, at least when people have been interviewing me or been writing about my research, has been kind of just they don't quite understand how mindfulness is about changing one's relationship to thoughts, emotions, and body sensations. There seems to be this meme that still infects some some reporters that it's about clearing our head or changing our thoughts or getting rid of stuff. And I don't know if that comes from there's been a long tradition of people reporting on cognitive behavioral therapy, which is about changing cognition. Right. But here mindfulness is very different. It's about changing our relationship to things. That's the first piece. The second piece is I see a lot of emphasis on kind of oversimplification of the brain. There's for some reason the amygdala has emerged as this fear organ, and that's not really it's involved in fear, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I think people like to have very simplified understandings of the brain, but this is where I see it get oversimplified to the point where it actually becomes, you want to have it simple, but you don't want to have it oversimplified where it actually detracts from the actual story there. So those are the two that I see the most.
Yeah, interesting. I noticed that as well when I'm watching interviews. And it's like, I think just the interviewer having a lack of knowledge about what mindfulness actually is. Yeah, that's helpful, Judd. And I think the oversimplification too, because you don't want to, we really, because this is so new in our common culture, I mean, it's not a new, it's an ancient practice, but I do worry a bit about misconceptions getting carried along. And it's like, we've got to really sort of try to catch it early and correct.
So here's an irony that I've noticed. I'm reading this great book by Alan Alda, who's gotten, later in his career, he's gotten very interested in science communication. I think the book's entitled something like, if I understood what you're saying, would I have this look on my face or something like that? Great book. But he talks about, so he's giving all these examples of where he was doing this series for, I think it was for the Discovery Channel, or I'm going to get that wrong, but some television show where he was interviewing a bunch of scientists about their work. And what he realized was that he didn't really have to know much about what they were doing. And in fact, the less he knew, the better his interviews went. All he had to do was be curious. And so he was actually embodying one of the main qualities of mindfulness, perhaps without even knowing it. So I would say, for any reporters, the idea here, the irony, the paradox, the whatever, is that if they're just curious and, don't assume that they know what mindfulness is, they're going to actually get it, better because they'll ask the right questions and they'll be curious, and they'll also be, they'll be embodying what mindfulness actually is.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Just such a great point. The curiosity. So they don't actually really need to necessarily know, but and in a way maybe keep what they've heard at bay and enter that kind of curious mindset. Yeah, that's really great. Interesting. But in general, I think, one of the hardest things for us as humans is uncertainty. I mean, most of us like to have information that can sort of tamp down the fear factor a bit. And but given the degree of social, political, and environmental unrest that we're dealing with right now, and the subsequent or consequent uncertainty, can you explain the physiology of anxiety? Like, what is actually going on, and how could mindfulness help?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the first place to start is just understanding that information is kind of food for our brain. So our brains are set up to predict the future based on previous experience, and they can predict better based on how certain information is. So if it's like the weather. If it's a 90% chance or 100% chance of raining tomorrow, you're more likely to get an umbrella versus you know, or look out the window and wait and see. So then you're not sure, do I get an umbrella or not? So here, if our brains, they really hate uncertainty, because when things are uncertain, our brains are trying to do these predictions, and they're coming up with this what if scenario, because it could be this, it could be that. Maybe I should bring my jacket, maybe I should bring my umbrella, maybe I shouldn't go out at all, whatever. So here, if you look at today's environment, we have a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and we even had this BC, before COVID-19. Right. Political uncertainty. You never knew what the president was going to tweet one day to the next. Environmental uncertainty, some job uncertainty, but that uncertainty has certainly increased. And now look with pandemics, for example, especially at the beginning of a pandemic, there's a huge amount of uncertainty when people don't know how deadly the virus is, and they don't know how contagious it is, and they don't know how to treat it and all this stuff. And that just makes our brains, it's like our head, the smoke starts to come out of our ears, and we start to go nuts, because our brains are trying to predict what to do, and they have no idea what to do, especially if they haven't run into a scenario like that before. None of us that are alive have ever been alive during a pandemic like this before, right? Just as an example. So that's the first key thing to know, is that uncertainty is something that our brains don't like, because the more information they can get, the more things, the more they can predict for the future. And that prediction makes, it comes in the form of feeling feeling comforted or solid in what you know. So uncertainty feels bad because it's our brain saying, hey, make this go away. And it actually urges us to go get information, which is probably why many of us are spending way too much time checking the news and checking our social media feeds to try to get more information. So that's the first piece. Now, how that spins into anxiety, it might seem obvious to some, but I'll just spell it out. That prediction machine in our brain that's trying to predict the future, it kind of spins out into these what if scenarios that turn into worry. So it's like, oh, maybe this will happen, maybe this will happen, oh, I'm worried that this will happen, I'm worried that will happen. So they kind of get this twinge of fear in them. And that fear plus uncertainty equals anxiety, right? And then it just compounds on itself, because the worry makes us feel more anxious, that anxiety makes us feel more worried, and then we go over that event horizon into that black hole of anxiety.
Vicious cycle.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there a point at which we can break in? Like how when you find yourself in that spiral?
Yes, fortunately, there is hope. There is something that we can do. So, imagine, for those that don't know what an event horizon is, we can geek out on space a little bit. So black holes have such a strong gravitational force that when you get close enough, nothing can there's no force that's strong enough to help you get out of the black hole. So that's why they call that an event horizon, because you're going in no matter what. This is the point where light cannot even escape. So black hole's gravitational force is so strong that it pulls light in, hence the black hole, right? So think of this event horizon. So many of us can feel like anxiety. Certainly my patients so many of us can feel like anxiety. Certainly my patients feel like anxiety can
Yeah.
be this black hole where it just sucks them in, and it just, they just get deeper and deeper and deeper as their anxiety spirals out of control.
Right.
So what can help our brain kind of not go over that event horizon is a couple of simple things. The first one is just recognizing that we are kind of spiraling out in anxiety and worry. And one way to do that is to just kind of map out, these habit loops around anxiety, which are actually pretty simple. 3 steps, a trigger, a behavior, and a result. So the trigger often is anxiety itself. The behavior is a mental worry. So mental behaviors count as behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So anxiety can trigger worry, and that worry results in making us feel like we're doing something, right? Because even if I can't control the future, at least I can worry about it.
So true. Like I'm being constructive.
Yeah, constructive in the sense that it feels like we're doing something. The problem is it's constructive in the sense that it just kind of hits our jets and moves us toward that black hole of anxiety, so we get more anxious.
Yes.
So what we can do to kind of cool our jets here and turn the other direction is to simply bring awareness in and start to map out these habit loops and see, oh, here's anxiety, it's triggering worry. Here's worry, it's actually making things worse, right? And that making things worse piece, becoming aware of that, can actually help us become less excited about worrying in the future, right? That's how our brains actually change behavior, is based on how rewarding a behavior is. So, if they see that worry isn't actually getting them anywhere, they start to become disenchanted with that old behavior. And so they might that can help them move away from worrying. In fact, my lab's actually done research on this, where we've done studies with app-based mindfulness training program. We've got one study with anxious physicians. We got a 57% reduction in anxiety, and another study with people with generalized anxiety disorder. They're the Olympians of worry, I think of them that way. 63% reduction in a randomized controlled trial.
Wow.
So mindfulness really can help, and we've even mechanistically mapped that out, where we can show that increases in mindfulness decrease worry, and that decrease in worry mediates a decrease in anxiety.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. One meditation teacher that's been really important for me is Joseph Goldstein, and one of his questions is often, does it help? Does it help? Yeah, interesting, because I come from a long line of great grandmothers, mothers. They're all warriors. Like they're really doing something, and they are doing something constructive. It's just in the opposite direction. So, yeah, does it help? Is one of the things that I teach in working with people, is that the more you have a regular daily meditation practice, the more the awareness will be available and accessible to you. Do you want to say anything about that?
I'd be happy to. And there's this saying that comes, I think, from Tibetan Buddhism, where they talk about short moments many times, which I like because, a lot of my research is around changing habits. And one way to form a new habit is to do that behavior, short moments, many times throughout the day. So here, in some of our research has borne this out with smoking cessation, where we found that actually, as people bring mindfulness to the activities, as they're paying attention when they smoke, and as they pay attention when they use mindfulness to ride out those cravings, the more they can do those in the moment exercises, the more they can actually break those bad habits, whether it's smoking. I see this also with emotional eating, and also with anxiety. So here I would say, these short moments many times very helpful. And of course, I grew up, my meditation practice started with, more formal meditation practices. Those have also been shown to help people, work with any type of habits that we've worked with. So here I would say pairing these in the moment practices, bringing mindfulness to the moment when somebody's struggling with a bad habit, for example, but also kind of setting the stage for the day, providing a grounding or a foundation of kind of stability of awareness, by doing some mindfulness practice at the beginning of the day. If people have time to do that, that's also extremely helpful.
Yeah, and I think, it doesn't have to be long drawn out, 45-minute hour practices, but I think, starting with a foundational short practice to help inform the many moments throughout the day. And I think, these habit tendencies are so automatic we don't think about them. So it's really interesting to think, can I start paying attention to smoking? And what is that experience really like? And can I pay attention to food in a way that I don't normally, and my body, how full am I or not? Like these are so automatic, and now you're really helping to draw attention to let's bring it back and see what does it actually feel like.
Yeah, I guess one way of putting that would be you could train people to mind the moment.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Yes, you can. How has your own practice or research changed through your interaction with patients? Like, what have you learned from your patients?
Oh, where do I start? I learn so much from my patients all the time. I would say I'll give a couple of examples.
Okay.
So one we were developing this app called Eat Right Now to bring some mindfulness to help people work with disordered eating, like binge eating or emotional eating. So I was working with a bunch of patients in my clinic who had binge eating disorder, where it's basically uncontrolled eating. They would just keep eating and eating. And that actually maps out pretty well with these habit loops. Negative emotions would trigger them to binge. And then one of my patients put it really succinctly. She said it helped me numb out. She could numb out from her binging. And she would binge on like entire large pizzas 20 out of 30 days a month. So she was really doing that a lot.
Yeah.
So I was working with a group of people with binge eating disorder, and I learned that they actually had no idea what the difference between physiologic and psychological hunger was. Basically, they would have a craving to eat, and they couldn't tell if they were actually physically hungry or if it was just satisfying this urge to eat because they had a negative emotion.
Yeah.
So I still remember this because this was so interesting to do. I walked up to the whiteboard with a group of them, and we actually just mapped this out. Like what's the difference between, it's called homeostatic hunger versus hedonic hunger, which is just fancy terms for are you actually physically hungry versus is it your mental state? And I could just see light bulbs go off in all of their heads. They're like, oh, wait a minute, we don't differentiate this. And in fact, that's one of the key aspects of helping people start to break these cycles of binge eating is to see, are they going to food because of emotions or are they going to food because they're actually hungry? And it helps them recalibrate those hunger signals in their body so they can actually respond to the ones that are helpful, help them eat when they're hungry, and also be able to ride out cravings when they have an urge to eat that's driven by emotion. So that's one thing that I've learned. I've learned a ton from my patients who have anxiety as well. So one, I didn't even actually know that anxiety was this habit loop until I started working with patients and started looking into this more. That habit loop that I just described earlier.
Yes.
It turns out that there's a large literature going back to the 1980s showing that these behaviors can be reinforced in the same way that eating behaviors can be reinforced.
Right.
And the other thing that's been very interesting that folks might find helpful, certainly my patients do, is being able to learn the difference between stress and anxiety, right? So stress tends to have a trigger. Like this is mental stress, not physiologic, like fight, flight stress, but mental stress. So, a to-do list is a example, or looking at somebody's, if somebody has a bunch of emails, they haven't checked their inbox in a while, and they look at their inbox and suddenly they're like, or they get an email from their boss and they don't even need to, they just see it's from their boss and suddenly they're stressed out, right? They don't even know what it said. Could be that you just got a raise, but it tends to be not the emails that we get from our bosses. So mental stress tends to be triggered by a thing. And if you work with that thing, then the stress can go away. So if your to-do list is stressing you out and you check off your to-do list, then that stress tends to get alleviated.
Yeah.
Anxiety is different. So stress can actually become anxiety, where it forms this anxiety as a habit loop. But anxiety itself can just come up. I have so many patients who they wake up in the morning, and as soon as they're awake, they're anxious.
Yes.
And then they're anxious throughout the day, and they're looking for what it is that's causing that anxiety.
Yeah.
And the more they look, the more they start worrying, and then anxiety then turns to that worry, and then the worry spins back on the anxiety, and then they're actually making themselves more anxious. So that's another thing that I learned. And then the overarching thing that I've learned from all of them is that, bringing awareness to any of these habit cycles, whether it's emotional eating or anxiety or smoking or whatever, just bringing awareness itself, it's amazing how that can help people start to step out of these cycles.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really kind of remarkable, isn't it? That being aware actually weakens whatever is happening. It's like the culprit has been seen, and yeah.
Folks, I hope you enjoyed the first 15 minutes of Tara's conversation with Dr. Judd Brewer. We'll present the second half when we see you next. That's every Tuesday and Friday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. In the meantime, you can find the links to these sessions and many other free resources at harvardpilgrim.org/mindfulness. You can check out what we've been up to lately on Facebook. That's facebook.com/mindthemoment, or on YouTube, youtube.com/mindthemoment. And that's where you can watch and rewatch all of the archived episodes of our Coffeehouse in the Cloud sessions. We hope to see you soon. Have a momentous day.
Andrea, thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.